My mom and stepdad killed my dad, and I didn't find out until he was dying. They say every family hides one secret that can destroy generations if it ever comes out. I used to think ours was something small, like a hidden debt or a cousin's illegitimate child, until the night I walked in on the truth that's been haunting me for years. Welcome to Raw Reddit Tales. Subscribe to keep getting the spiciest stories. My name's Claire. I'm 27, and the secret I've kept could ruin 3 lives, including mine. It started the night my mom's husband Mark came home from one of his business trips. He wasn't my real dad, but he'd raised me since I was 10, after my biological father died in a car crash. Mark was the kind of man people called respectable, pressed suits, charming laugh, and the kind of smile that made people forget to ask questions. That night, I was up late in the kitchen scrolling through my phone when he walked in, smelling like expensive cologne and guilt. He froze when he saw me, eyes bloodshot, and whispered, "Claire, you weren't supposed to be awake." At first, I thought nothing of it, until I noticed his shirt buttons mismatched and a lipstick smear on his collar. I teased him about it, joking he should hide the evidence before Mom woke up. He just stared at me, too long, too silent. Then, without warning, he said, "Your mother doesn't need to know anything that happens between us, okay?" I laughed, confused, until he stepped closer, his hand brushing my arm. The air froze. My chest went tight, and in that moment, I knew the kind of secret he meant. I told myself I must have misunderstood, that maybe he was drunk, but then the text started. Messages from an unknown number saying things like, "I missed last night," or "Don't make me remind you what's at stake." When I confronted him, he smiled and said, "You wouldn't want your mother to find out what really happened that night, would you?" That's when I realized I wasn't just keeping a family secret. I was trapped in one. People think the worst part of keeping a secret is the guilt, but it's not. It's the way it rewires your brain, how every sound, every glance feels like a threat waiting to explode. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't look my mom in the eye without feeling like I was betraying her and myself at the same time. Mark started acting like nothing happened. Every morning he'd greet me with that fake smile, kiss my mom on the forehead, and pour his coffee like he hadn't turned my life upside down. My mom, always so trusting, kept thanking him for taking care of us. The words burned in my chest. But the more I tried to act normal, the deeper the lie pulled me in. He became bolder, whispered comments when Mom wasn't around. "You look just like her when she was your age. You should be careful walking around the house in that shirt." I started avoiding home altogether, late shifts at work, staying with friends, anything to escape him. But the more distance I tried to create, the tighter his grip got. One night, he sent me a picture, me at the grocery store, taken from a distance. The message read, "You're not as invisible as you think." That was when fear turned into survival. I started digging into his past, determined to find anything that could turn the tables. Old receipts, emails, hidden folders on his laptop. What I found made my blood run cold. There were photos, women, dozens of them, different cities, all younger, some looked barely legal. And then I saw one I recognized, my mother. The date stamp said 2012, but I was in the photo too, a child in the background. It hit me that he'd been grooming people for years, hiding behind his perfect dad act. That night, I printed every photo and left them on my mom's vanity. I didn't sleep. I waited for the explosion that never came. By morning, the photos were gone, and Mom was silent. She made breakfast like always, her eyes red, hands shaking. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't have done that, Claire." I asked what she meant. She said quietly, "You don't understand who he really is." When someone says, "You don't understand who he really is," you expect a confession, maybe a warning. But my mom's words didn't sound like fear. They sounded like allegiance. That morning, as she stirred her coffee with trembling hands, I realized she wasn't planning to leave him. She was protecting him. Before we continue with the story, click on the subscribe button, like and share. I couldn't process it. "Mom, he's sick. He's dangerous," I said, trying to make her look at me. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Claire," she whispered, everything we have depends on him." Then she leaned closer and said something that shattered me completely. "You think you're the first?" My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just turned away, wiping her face, whispering, "You'll only make it worse." That's when I realized the truth wasn't just about what Mark did. It was about what my mother allowed. She knew. She had always known. I left the house that day with my phone, my ID, and a backpack full of panic. I stayed in a cheap motel outside town, trying to convince myself I was safe. But safety doesn't exist when your enemy knows everything about you. Mark knew my passwords, my bank details, my friends. Within days, strange things started happening. My work email was hacked, my location tags kept turning on by themselves, and an envelope appeared under my motel door with a single photo. Me, sleeping. I broke down and called my boyfriend, Liam. I told him everything, from the night in the kitchen to my mom's confession. He was silent for a long time before asking, "So, are you saying he touched you?" His voice cracked on the word, and I could hear the disbelief. I said yes. Then there was only silence. An hour later, his number was disconnected. The next morning, I went back home. The front door was wide open. My mom sat on the couch, pale, shaking. "He knows," she said quietly. "He found out you told someone." My stomach turned cold. "Where is he now?" I whispered. She looked at me, eyes hollow. "He said he's coming for both of us." I was 18 when it all started, old enough to understand right from wrong, but too young to know how deep silence can bury you. Back then, I was a college freshman living at home to save money. My mom and Mark had just celebrated their 10th anniversary, and I remember thinking they were the perfect couple. Funny how perfect looks so much like pretending. Mark used to pick me up from campus sometimes, saying he didn't want me taking the bus at night. At first, I thought it was sweet, like he genuinely cared. But looking back now, at 27, healed but scarred, I see how carefully he was setting the stage. Every compliment, every casual touch on my shoulder, every time he told my mom how mature I'd become, it was all part of the grooming. Before we continue with the story, click on the subscribe button, like and share. One night, he offered to help me study for an exam. Mom was working a double shift at the hospital, and I didn't think twice. He brought wine, said it would help me relax. I laughed, awkward but flattered, trying to act older than I was. The details of that night blur together now, like a film I've watched too many times but still can't forget. I remember the smell of his cologne, the flash of the camera light when he said, "Smile for me," and the crushing weight of realizing that every boundary I thought existed had just been erased. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. He even made breakfast, humming to himself while I sat there, numb. I wanted to scream, but Mom walked in, kissed him on the cheek, and asked if I'd studied well. I nodded. That was the first lie I ever told her. For years, I carried that night like a secret wound. Every time I tried to tell someone, a friend, a counselor, I'd freeze. How do you explain that your mom's husband didn't just break your trust, but rewired your life? Now at 27, I tell this story not because I want pity, but because silence almost killed me. I've healed enough to speak, but not enough to forget. And the worst part? Mark wasn't finished with me even after that night. Healing doesn't come all at once. It's not a single moment where you wake up and feel free. It's a slow, messy war between the version of yourself that survived and the one that never got a chance to exist. I spent years trying to forget what happened, pretending it was a bad dream that ended the moment I moved out. But the truth is, trauma has a way of following you, even into the life you build to escape it. After that night, Mark acted like nothing had changed. He'd still text me when I was in college, little messages like, "Proud of you, kiddo," or "You'll always be special to me." Each one made my stomach turn. I blocked him, changed my number, even transferred schools just to start over. But every time I saw a man with that same cologne or heard his voice in my head saying my name, it felt like he was right there again, still in control. Before we continue with the story, click on the subscribe button, like, and share. By the time I turned 24, I was in therapy. It took months before I could say his name out loud. My therapist said trauma keeps looping until you face it. But how do you face a ghost who's still alive? Then one afternoon, my mom called. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. "Claire," she said, "I need your help. Mark's in trouble." I hung up without a word. 2 days later, she showed up at my apartment. She looked thinner, older, like she hadn't slept in weeks. "He's sick," she said, tears in her eyes. "He needs to see you." I almost laughed. "You mean the man who destroyed my life?" She flinched, then whispered, "You don't understand, Claire. He's dying." Part of me wanted to say good, but another part, the part still craving closure, agreed to see him. When I walked into that hospital room, I expected to feel rage. Instead, I felt nothing. He looked smaller, weaker, hooked up to machines. His eyes found mine, and he smiled faintly. "You turned out strong," he said. Then his voice dropped lower. "But your mother, she's not who you think she is." For a long time, I thought my mother was a victim too, a woman trapped by loyalty, fear, and dependency. But standing in that hospital room, staring at the man who destroyed my life, I realized he wasn't just talking nonsense. There was something in his voice, certainty, almost amusement. When he said, "She's not who you think she is," a chill crawled up my spine. I asked him what he meant. But before he could answer, my mom walked in. She froze when she saw me, then looked at him like she already knew what he'd said. "Mark, don't," she warned. Her voice cracked. He smirked. That same smug curl I remembered from my teenage years. "Oh, come on. Claire deserves to know the truth." I turned to her, my heart pounding. "What truth?" I demanded. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat beside his bed, her hands shaking. "I stayed because I had to," she whispered. "You were supposed to be protected." My voice broke. "Protected from what, Mom?" Mark laughed weakly. "From her past," he said. "Ask her about your father's accident." Everything inside me went silent. My father's death was the one thing I never questioned. Mom had said it was a rainy night, a car crash, nothing more. But when I looked at her, I saw something I'd never seen before. Pure panic. "He's lying," she said quickly, but her eyes told another story. After Mark died 2 days later, I couldn't shake his words. So I started digging. Police reports, old newspapers, even insurance records. That's when I found it. My father's case wasn't closed. The brakes on his car had been tampered with, and the only person who had access to the vehicle before the crash was my mother. I confronted her with the evidence. She didn't deny it. She just sat there exhausted, whispering, "I did what I had to do." My chest tightened. "You killed him?" She nodded slowly. "He was going to take you away from me. I couldn't lose you." For years, I carried Mark's secret, thinking he was the monster. But maybe the truth was worse. Maybe the monster raised me. The end. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. What do you think of this story? Please comment below.